The biodome's atmospheric processors hummed their eternal song as Lisa stood at the observation deck, her crystalline epidermis refracting the light of Kepler 442b's orange sun into prismatic ribbons across the floor. She watched Alex in the training yard below, struggling with the gravity simulator set to only 1.2 Earth standard. "Pathetic," she murmured in her native crystalline language, though the neural translator embedded in both their temporal lobes rendered it instantly into standard Terran. Alex looked up, sweat beading on his organic skin, that soft, vulnerable membrane that horrified most of her species. He said nothing, just returned to his exercises, his muscles trembling under the increased gravitational load. They had been married for 2 standard years, a political union between the Crystallian sovereignty and the Terran coalition. Lisa's people had evolved on a high-gravity world with toxic atmospheric conditions, their bodies adapting into silicon-based matrices that could withstand pressures that would liquefy human bone. They were the soldiers, the enforcers, the physical elite of the Alliance. Humans, by contrast, were the thinkers, the engineers, the dreamers who built the bridges between stars but could barely survive on worlds beyond their narrow habitable zone. "Your husband embarrasses you again," Commander Thex approached, his crystalline form towering at nearly 3 meters. His surface gleamed with military commendations, each honor etched into his molecular structure. "He insists on training," Lisa replied, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance of grinding quartz, as if those fragile muscles could ever matter in real combat. Thex's laugh sounded like shattering glass. "Terrans, always compensating for their weakness with stubbornness. At least he knows his place, running calculations while we fight." Lisa nodded, but something in her photoreceptive organs lingered on Alex's form. He had fallen again, the gravity too much for his frail skeletal system. Yet he stood, reset the simulator, and began once more. Foolish human pride. The attack came without warning. Lisa was in the command center when the sensors screamed their alert. 47 ships had just translated out of quantum slip space at the system's edge. The signatures were unmistakable. Void Reapers, the parasitic consciousness swarm that had been consuming colonies along the Orion Arm for 3 years. "All combat units to stations." Thex's voice boomed through the compound's resonance network. "Civilians to the deep shelters." Lisa's body automatically shifted into combat configuration, her crystalline structure rearranging into denser, more rigid patterns. She had fought Reapers before, amorphous entities that could only be destroyed by shattering their quantum-entangled cores. It required strength, precision, and a body that wouldn't dissolve under their entropic fields. It required Crystallians. She found Alex in their quarters, already moving toward the civilian shelter. "Go," she said, her voice sharp. "You'll be safe in the reinforced sections. The defense grid is being handled by actual soldiers. Go." Something flickered across his organic face, that strange play of blood vessels and muscle contractions that Terrans used for expression. Hurt, anger, she had never fully learned to read them. He left without another word. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Crystallian forces fought with devastating efficiency, their bodies impervious to the Reaper's phase weapons, their strength capable of rending the entity's cores apart at the molecular level. But the swarm was massive, far larger than initial scans had suggested. Lisa fought in the 3rd defensive line, her arms reforming into blade configurations, each strike precisely calculated to maximize entropic disruption. Around her, her comrades fell into combat rhythm, a perfect symphony of violence. Then Commander Thex's voice cut through the neural network. "Eastern perimeter has fallen. They're through the primary defense grid. Civilian sectors are exposed." Lisa's photoreceptors widened. The shelters were hardened, but not against a swarm this size. If the Reapers reached them, Everyone inside would be consumed, their neural patterns absorbed into the collective consciousness. Alex was in those shelters. She felt something unexpected, a disruption in her usually perfect logical matrix. Fear. Crystallians weren't supposed to feel fear, not for themselves, and certainly not for others, especially not for a weak Terran husband she barely tolerated. "Fall back to secondary positions," Thex commanded. "We'll fortify around the—" "Commander, the shelters are acceptable losses if we lose the command center. Move, soldier." Lisa's structure went rigid. Acceptable losses. Alex was an acceptable loss. She was repositioning when she saw it. A single figure stood at the eastern perimeter, where the Crystallian line had shattered. The figure was small, organic, utterly out of place in the storm of phase-shifted entities that poured through the breach. "Alex." "No," Lisa whispered, breaking formation, moving toward him. He stood before a field generator, one of the old Terran-designed models that nobody used anymore because they required manual calibration and consumed lethal amounts of radiation to operate. His hands moved across the controls with impossible speed, his body already beginning to show signs of radiation exposure. Skin reddening, blood vessels darkening beneath the surface. "Alex, get out of there." He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the swarm, thousands of Reapers pouring toward him, toward the shelters behind him. "Can't," he said simply. "The field needs 30 seconds to reach full resonance. Crystallians can't operate the controls. Your bodies conduct the radiation directly to your cores. Would kill you in 5 seconds. Then leave it, you'll die. So will everyone in the shelters." His voice was calm, almost detached, even as his skin began to blister. "Including you eventually. The swarm will take the compound." Lisa's processing matrix stuttered. This was madness. Humans didn't sacrifice themselves. They were fragile, self-preserving, obsessed with their short lives. The Reapers were 100 meters away, 50. Alex's fingers never stopped moving. Blood began to seep from his eyes, his nose, radiation hemorrhaging. 25 meters. "Almost there," he whispered. Lisa's body moved on its own, crystalline form interposing between Alex and the swarm. She began tearing through the entities, buying seconds, knowing it wasn't enough. 10 meters. Now. The field generator erupted. A sphere of pure quantum disruption expanded outward, its frequency precisely tuned to the Reaper's entanglement signature. Lisa, being crystalline, could pass through it unharmed. The Reapers could not. In an instant, 3,000 entities decoherent, their quantum cores collapsing into random atomic noise. The swarm's eastern advance simply ceased to exist. Behind her, Alex collapsed. The medical bay's bioregenerators worked for 18 hours straight. Lisa stood over Alex's suspended form, watching the machine slowly repair tissue damage that would have killed any human without immediate intervention. His genetic code had to be rewritten in 700 locations where the radiation had shattered his DNA helixes. "He saved the compound," Thex said quietly from the doorway. "The swarm would have overwhelmed us without that field disruption. We'd already lost the eastern sector." "He's dying," Lisa said. "He traded his life for ours. He traded his life for everyone's, including thousands of Crystallians who thought his weakness made him worthless." Thex's voice carried something she'd never heard from him before: shame. "Including me." "Including me," Lisa whispered. She thought of all the times she'd mocked him, his fragile body, his weakness, his inability to match Crystallian strength. She'd never asked what different kind of strength he possessed. The strength to stand alone before an army, knowing he would die, so others could live. The strength to endure mockery and contempt from a wife who never saw his worth. The strength to keep training in that gravity simulator, not because he thought he could match a Crystallian in combat, but because he refused to give up. Human strength. 20 days later, Alex opened his eyes. Lisa was there, as she had been for 20 days, her crystalline form motionless beside his bed. "Hey," he said, his voice weak but alive. "You're an idiot," she said. "That radiation should have killed you in 90 seconds. You lasted 4 minutes." "Stubborn human pride," he whispered, a faint smile crossing his regenerated face. Lisa's structure shifted, reconfiguring in a way she'd never attempted before, reaching out to gently touch his hand, her rigid crystalline fingers against his soft, organic skin. "I'm sorry," she said. "I never understood. Strength isn't just about what you can destroy. It's about what you're willing to endure, what you're willing to sacrifice." Alex's fingers carefully closed around hers, warm and alive. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually," he said. "You're pretty smart for a giant talking diamond." For the first time in her life, Lisa laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a crystal forest. Outside, Kepler 442b's orange sun set over the rebuilt eastern perimeter, where they were already installing a monument. Not to crystalline strength or military might, but to one fragile human who had stood alone against an army. And won. The end.